I'm Jeremy Epling. Thanks for coming. I know it's the last talk of the day at the end of the conference, so it takes some willpower to get up and get in here. But I've got some exciting stuff to talk about today. We just recently launched a new service called Azure Pipelines. And what Azure Pipelines is all about is a CICD service that can build anything from an open source project to a really complicated multi-cloud web service deployment. And what I'm going to do, so today's talk's mainly going to be a lot of demos. I'm going to walk through some of the open source projects that have moved over to us, and then I'm going to show kind of how we use Azure Pipelines to build Azure Pipelines as well. So starting with a little bit about me, so I'm a product manager on Azure Pipelines. One of the other things I work on is actually a bunch of our Git client work. So as you know, Microsoft's been making big strides in open source, and one of the things that we've been doing is a lot of work into the core Git code base to make sure Git scales to really large repos. We've moved Windows over to Git, which is kind of like a huge mind bend if you think of where Microsoft was 10 years ago, to think the version control system that Linus built is actually what we're using for Windows. So we do work there. Other stuff, husband, dad, rock climber, definitely in the wannabe artist phase now. One of the funny things that happened recently, though, was you'll notice this video. I'm sure everybody's wondering, what's going on with this video? So one of the things was I was at home a couple days ago watching the kids by myself, and I was looking down, take a drink, get on my phone, maybe spent too long on my phone, and I looked down and my daughter's disappeared, my 1-year-old daughter that just learned how to walk, and I'm like, oh my gosh, where is she? So I'm running into the kitchen, I'm running over here trying to figure out, running all around the house. I'm like, oh my gosh, did I just lose my daughter? My wife's going to kill me when she comes back. What is going on? And then all of a sudden I hear some giggling from the kitchen counter. I walk over the kitchen counter and I see this little thud on the door, and I open it up and she's decided that she loves to hide in empty cabinets and play peekaboo. So when my wife gets home, I ask her, and I'm just like, hey, did you know about this? And she gives me this wiry, devilish smile. She's like, oh, I forgot to tell you that? I was like, oh, that was cold. So my dad was watching Kids Next Week, so obviously what did I do? I didn't tell him either. So this is a little video of her playing peekaboo with my dad that I just got yesterday, and I know she would love to be playing peekaboo with all of you now.
Hey, Clara, where are you? Oh, there you are. I see you. Yes, I see you. What are you doing in there?
I know. I think my son is a little too aggressive in shoving her back into the cabinet, but we'll work on that on Thursday when I'm back at home. So one of the things I was saying earlier is Microsoft's been going through this big transformation, and our relationship with open source from 20 years ago is completely different since when Satya's come in, and I really love this quote. Judge us by the actions we have taken in the recent past, our actions today, and our actions in the future. Even for some of the announcements that you saw recently, like the open source licensing we've done with all of our patents with Linux, we're really all in on open source. And you can see that over the actions that we've taken too. You can see even from 2012 all the way to 2018, every year we're contributing to more open source projects, we're open sourcing more of our code, and really trying to connect with where developers are and transforming the kind of mindset of the company, which is really exciting for a lot of people like me. When I started my career, I was working on W3C working groups, have been very active in a lot of open source projects, mainly kind of on the Git side of things. And it's great to see the company kind of move and contributing even directly to Linux and Kubernetes over time. One of our next steps in this journey is actually not just contributing to open source and being a part of the community, but actually trying to give back in a more holistic way. And that's one of the things that we've done with Azure Pipelines. So since the announcement, one of the big things that we did was we decided, hey, we want to do more for open source other than just contributing. We want to have a really generous CI/CD offer for all open source repos. So what we offer is unlimited build minutes for any open source project out there. And you get 10 parallel jobs across Linux, macOS, and Windows. So this is great if you're working on any open source project and you want to make sure your Node library, your Python package, anything like that builds across a multitude of different operating systems. You can easily do that now with one product and have blazing fast builds with 10 parallel jobs. And then also if you're using containers, you can also use Windows containers or Linux containers as well. So you have your choice if you want to run directly on the VM and do that, or run inside a container. And just in the last month, we've seen a lot of great adoption. So, some of the ones you'd probably expect, like .NET and VS Code. One of the great things was I was talking to one of the engineers from VS Code the other night, and he's like, I just want to let you know, we actually moved your product because we like it better. We didn't feel forced to go do this. So, and you can see that by everyone else that's moved over. So far, GitHub Desktop, Webpack, Python, .NET, VS Code, Atom, Parcel. Whoops, skipped ahead a little bit there. Gatsby, React UI, Pandas, many, many more repos. And we have more moving over every single day just because they love the generous offer that we're giving of being able to have really fast CI and kind of one CI system that will actually scale across all the major platforms they need to test on. And then one of the other things is a lot of the technology that we've used to kind of create Azure Pipelines was a previous service that we have kind of grown up with a new UI and a new experience. So we have actually a lot of Microsoft, pretty much every team at Microsoft is running all their core CI/CD through Azure Pipelines today. And we actually have over 21 million jobs we run every single month. So it's all of Microsoft is kind of getting powered by this. So we have the scale, the breadth, as well as the kind of simplicity that you'll see in a second. So enough with the talking. Let's jump into a demo. Let me get this over here. So one of the things I'm going to start with here is we're actually just going to get set up with the GitHub Marketplace app. So one of the first things that we did when we launched was create a Marketplace app, just because we wanted to have that native integration directly into GitHub. So I can go through here. I can go ahead and set up a new plan. You'll notice we have a free offer here. Go through, say I want to install that for free. I'm going to select my organization that I have right here, created for today. And we go ahead and kick off the installation. I really love this product, so I'm going to have it run in all my repos. Now, I need to jump over. Sorry, 1 second here. I'm not getting my display mirrored here. Having an issue with that. Yeah. No, it's okay, I can work around it. Let's actually jump right over to this then. So I'm going to go ahead and go over here. I'll go through the getting started experience in a second. So one of the things that we'll go do is what I did was I selected one of the open source repos that's moved over to us recently and just kind of want to show you kind of how they're going about using the product. So one of the things you'll notice, this is Parcel. It's one of the top repos on GitHub. And you'll notice they have an Azure Pipelines YAML file just directly in the repository. So if I click on that, I can go in and kind of see how they're actually using us today. So if you look down in here, you can see that they're running a set of jobs, as you would imagine, and they're taking advantage of our multi-platform support. So they're basically running a template. I'll get to that in a second. It's basically a way to reuse sections of your YAML, so a set of steps or a set of jobs. And you can externalize those into separate files. So you can reuse that if you want to have multiple pipelines for a single repository. So they're running one on Mac OS. And that's the name of it. They pass in a parameter. So the way the templates work is you can pass in a set of parameters to be able to run them as basically like functions. And then they're running it across Mac OS, Linux, and then also Windows. So let's jump back over and actually see what's going on inside that template. So what you'll see when you open up this template is you start to see some of the power of what Azure Pipelines can do. It's more than just running a set of scripts. What I can go through here and do is you can see, hey, they're passing in through the template that parameter. So letting know, what is this job? Is it going to run on which VM image is it going to run on here? So no, it's going to run on Mac OS, on Windows, on Linux. And then what they're doing is, on top of having 3 jobs, so by default, all jobs run in parallel. So they're already going to kick off 3 builds. So they're going to take advantage of that parallelism that we have. But that's 3 of the 10. So obviously, they want to test more than just that. So what they're doing on top of that is adding a matrix in. So what it's going to do is it's going to kick off all 3 of those jobs. And then on top of that, it's also going to run 3 jobs for every single one of those, all passing in separate variables for the version of Node that they want to test on. So again, it'll be testing Windows, Linux, and Mac across Node v6, v8, and v10. Then down here, you can see the set of steps that they're running. So right here, they're just setting the version of Node. They're going down here and doing a Rust install. One of the other features that we have here that you'll notice right here is conditionals. So sometimes in your build, you don't want to run everything the same way. You want to say, hey, only run this step if something has succeeded. Sometimes you only want to run something if it's a pull request build versus a CI build, especially if you're dealing with security or you're dealing with a set of secrets. A lot of the times if a build comes from a fork, you don't want to be giving all the secrets for publishing down to that fork build because they could just steal those. So you may want to have a set of things that are conditionalized in your build. So what they're doing here is basically saying not equal to Windows. So hey, this is something we're not doing on Windows. And then if it is Windows, we're going to run a slightly different script. And then a lot of things you would expect if you're familiar with JavaScript. Run yarn, run my tests, run my lint. So we're going to go over here. And what does this actually look like? So we can go over to one of their commits. And we can see that, hey, they had a build that ran successfully recently. Go over here, and this is part of the GitHub App Integration. So when you install a GitHub app, one of the things that you get is, aside from having CI set up for you, pull requests set up for you, and sort of building that identity mapping between the two, you also get this checks experience that's built in. So you'll see checks for CI builds, and this is just a GitHub feature. You'll see it for pull request as well. So I can go ahead and see this is successful. If there were errors or warnings or I wanted to dig in more, I can click right here. And what this is going to do is take me to the Azure Pipelines experience. So this is where you can kind of dig in and peel that next layer of the onion to understanding what's going on with my builds. So over here, you can say, hey, they made a change. Here was the commit that was in the change. They built it. It was successful. If I wanted to go dig into the logs, this is where things start to get interesting. So you can see how that YAML file was kind of exploded out to run multiple parallel builds. So every single time they have a push of a new commit to master, it's going to kick off every single one of these builds. So just like we talked about before, they're running Mac here, and that's matrixing across 3 different versions of Node, Linux, and Windows. So again, they're taking advantage of that full 10 parallel jobs immediately. If I wanted to dig in to any of the logs, I can click over here, and you'll notice I can see all of the logs. I have a mini-map over here. This is actually using Monaco, which is the core editor for VS Code. So we use that to visualize the logs. And from there, you can perform a lot of other Monaco tasks. I can go ahead and find. I can bring up the command palette for a limited set of commands there. This is really powerful, especially if you're a larger company that often has really long, large files. This is all virtualized, so you can just use the Control F there, search all the way through your logs, find what you're looking for. We do syntax coloring, highlighting, everything there right in the logs experience. One of the other interesting things that we've done is if you go over to Webpack, you can see some more of the functionality. So a lot of the times you just don't have a set of jobs that you all want to run in parallel. A lot of times you want to build kind of a graph, a dependency graph. So sometimes you may want to fan out and fan in. We make that very simple with our YAML file. So as you can see right here, I'm over in the Webpack repo. And as I had highlighted a second ago, let's switch that over to this one. You can see right here under this job, their Linux job, they're saying, hey, it depends on the basic job and the lint job to run first. So again, up above here, you'll see this lint job and then this basic job. Both of those must complete before this Linux job is kicked off. And then if I go down, I also have macOS depending on them. So again, you'd see those 2 jobs run in parallel, and then it kind of fans out again to all those. You can also do fan in, fan out, any sort of complex graph. I'll show a couple of more of those a little bit later in the demo, but you can build these complicated graphs that are as complicated as kind of you need your build system to be, but it offers a lot of flexibility and a lot of power to the system. One of the other things that you'll notice is, let's jump over here to the VS Code repo. One of the things I talked about as well is not only can you run directly on a VM image, which is needed for a lot of open source repositories, but you can also run what we call container jobs that are similar to kind of VM jobs. So what you'll notice here is I do say there's a VM, so this container will be running on Ubuntu. It could be on Windows, because Windows supports containers as well with Windows Server. And then I give the actual container. And this can be whatever container you want. You can bring your own container. And then we're going to run all of those build steps that are defined. In this case, they externalize those into a template file, but you could have the steps right there. We're going to run those inside the container. So this is a great way to get reproducible, predictable builds is you can constrain your environment more instead of running on a VM where we have lots of tools installed and we do a lot of work to make sure those aren't kind of clobbering each other. But you can build a container that's just the minimal thing you want. Maybe you want Alpine, Debian Stretch, and you just want a couple dependencies in there and you want to make sure that's exactly what you need. You can go ahead and specify whatever container you want. We'll pull that down from whatever registry and run your build inside of it. One of the other things here, let me do a little bit of screen jumping here. Give me 1 second. Now let's look at a little bit more of a complicated build process. Maybe a mature build process, even better word for that. So one of the things that we do is obviously we use Azure Pipelines to build Azure Pipelines. So this is actually a pull request build of our product. So it shows off a little bit more. A lot of the open source repositories will just do a build, they'll run a set of tests, they'll see if it's fine and kind of stop there. Some of them, like .NET, or some of the more mature open source projects are very advanced in what they go use. But this I like because you can kind of see the full gamut of things and you can see how we use our own product. So one of the things you'll notice is this was a PR that actually just went in a few days ago. You'll notice that we have an associated set of changes here. We ran the pipeline, it all succeeded. One of the things you'll notice here is we produced 2 build artifacts as part of the build process. So we have a task where you can basically just publish build artifacts. One of the unique things about our product is we provide artifact storage as a built-in concept into Azure Pipelines. So you don't have to go grab an S3 bucket, manage that, or have things pushed to some other system where you're not sure when they're going to delete it. We keep it around. And for companies that especially have compliance requirements, this is really interesting for them because they can set customized retention policies on those artifacts as well. So I can say, keep it around for X number of days, keep it around for so many different types of build outputs. So you have a lot of flexibility in what you can go do, but that artifact storage is just built directly into the product along with controlling retention for those. One of the other things that you can do is set up a more advanced pipeline that doesn't just do CI or CD and drop some artifacts. It actually does a full deployment. So one of the things that you'll notice here is I actually did a full deployment to multiple different environments, and it was successful. One of the things that you'll see in addition to this is this is our CI build. So over here is a pull request build. Sorry, I misspoke before. In the pull request build, one of the things I picked this one up is because it was actually a failure. So it shows some of the test analysis capabilities that we have in the product as well. So as you would imagine, you can see all the steps in the build. We're a pretty advanced product. We have a lot of steps there. One of the things that you can see down here is we immediately pull out the error that was there. If I want to go see what the error is, I can click, I can bring up the logs, I can go over here, jump, use the mini map, go find out where the error is, kind of dig in. That's fine. It's a good experience to go dig into the logs. A better experience, though, is if I can actually just go over to this test tab. And one of the things that the test tab will do is it actually looks at the output of the tests. So you can specify this, whether it be JUnit output or whatever, Colberta, whatever output format that you want. We support multiple different ones. And you can go ahead and see how these tests have been doing. So you can see, hey, our team does a pretty good job with testing, I think. We have about 85,000 tests that run on every single pull request. And you can go ahead and see what the failure is. You can see the pass percentage, see how long they take. By default, because this is a failed build, we filtered this down just to the failed builds. And you'll notice both of these are kind of new failures. We've actually tagged this one as flaky. And the way we think about a flaky test is it works sometimes, it doesn't work other times. So maybe I want to dig in and really understand why I have this flaky test. I can go over here, I can see the error message, I can see the stack trace. But again, this is just limiting it to this PR. I want to go figure out, like, when did this problem start happening? What introduced the issue? So I'm actually going to go back to our pull request pipeline. And this is, you can see this little star here. This is a preview feature that we have right now. I'm actually going to run analytics on this. You'll see, hey, our pass rate's pretty good. But let's dig in a little bit more to understand what test failures we've been having across this entire pipeline. So what you'll see here is a couple things that we have. We have a lot of tests. It takes a second or two to come in. You'll see our pass rate, how we're doing on failing tests. You can see the result count and sort of see where is the dip. It's like, oh, okay, there was seriously a problem here with the tests. And then you can go through, and if you remember from a second ago, this people picker dropdown was actually the one that we were looking at before, and you can see, hey, its pass rate has not been doing too well. It's at 82%. and that I can see that it's failed 731 times. I can go ahead and click into that test, and then I can get even more visibility into what's going on. So I can look on the specific days, how well is this test doing, how much is it passing, how much is it failing, and obviously something seemed to happen right about here. This test started to fail a lot recently. So again, it's really about trying to give you those insights that you need to diagnose. And one of the things that we found is as more people are trying to move to kind of a DevOps workflow, as you're trying to get CICD truly integrated into your process, you want to have that quality. You want to have it upstream as close to the developer that's writing the code. You need to have a great automated test suite. But it's a lot of work to get a great, reliable automated test suite. And the main thing that you need to do is be on top of all of the failures. Have somebody that's looking on it, figuring out what it is, and helping them quickly diagnose when did the failure happen, who introduced the failure, how do we get it fixed quickly, and have that fast turnaround to keep that productivity. So that's what this test analysis feature is really all about, getting that extra set of insights into what's going on. Another part of the product, though, is not just building and testing and publishing up artifacts and maybe having a simple deployment. You can even have a lot more complicated deployments here. So if you look at this, this is actually us deploying. This is our actual prod update. The on-prem version of our product was called TFS, if you've heard of that before. So this is an actual prod update, I think, from 3 days ago that I'm showing. And you can see kind of the fan out, fan in that we talked about before kind of visualized in this graph. So you can see we have this ring 0. These are our kind of early adopter customers, our internal teams. They go off. We kick all of those off. Then we go through and have a much larger graph where we kind of expand out to different stages and environments kind of over time as we roll out. And on each one of these, you'll notice this icon here, and I'll get into this more in a second. You can set up approvals and gates and different things to kind of determine what makes that transition happen and what do you allow to move from one environment to another. But this really shows kind of for a more advanced, mature, larger service, exactly what can happen. And you can see over here some of the failures started. So we stopped progressing it. And that you can see that this failure was canceled, who it was canceled by, you know who to follow up, you know how to email, and to go kind of take the next step on that. So let's kind of look at a smaller pipeline and a smaller deployment and kind of look at what that is. So I think of this demo as the we integrate with everything demo. So the thing that I love about this one is Azure Pipelines really isn't just about Azure stuff, right? Like we don't feel like it's really compelling if all we can talk to is Azure Container Registry and deploy to Azure. One of the things we want to be able to do is have a real vibrant ecosystem. So one of the things that you can do is it doesn't matter what container service you're using, what package service that you're using to host your packages, where your artifacts are coming from. Even if you want to deploy to Google Cloud or AWS, that's all possible as part of pipelines. And not only that, one of the things that you'll notice is we had kind of 2 artifacts that are part of this deployment. This one down here actually came from Azure Pipelines. This one actually came from Jenkins. One of the things I noticed when I talk to a lot of customers, a lot of them have Jenkins for their CI system. That's great. I'd much rather they use Azure Pipelines, but I understand what it's like to have a large system that you're currently using. But one of the things that we do really well is we can pair with Jenkins and provide that more advanced CD, continuous delivery side of things, and you can still be using your existing Jenkins builds, or you can just use us for the entire pipeline. So it allows for that easy onboarding as you're transitioning. So what we have here is a pretty simple build that has 2 stages. This one is actually taking these artifacts. One of them is deploying them to AWS on Linux. The other one is using Ansible to deploy them to Azure. So let's open this up for a second. When I click on one of these stages, I can actually see what happened in the deployment. So I actually know the exact release of the deployment. I can go ahead and see what triggered it. I can see the specific artifacts. I can go ahead and click on these links and jump directly to the Jenkins artifact there. A lot of the times what I want to figure out on a given release is what was actually in that release. So I can go right here, I can click on this commit. This commit could be on GitHub, it could be on any other source provider. We go ahead and link those up. So again, you get that traceability across all the different aspects. In this case, I also have work items hooked up, and I have these hooked up over to Jira. So if I click over here, I could be using Azure Boards, or I could just be using Jira. And again, that native connection, that traceability kind of happens through everything. And then I can jump over here. And again, I can see that, hey, we have this deployment to Azure, what commits are on it. A lot of the times, what I'll want to go do is, let me jump over to this one, and I can go ahead and edit this pipeline. So we'll go over here, edit the pipeline. So this is kind of our WYSIWYG visual experience for editing the pipeline. So what I can go through here is if I want to go ahead and add another stage, I can go through and click the Add button. We have a set of templates that make it really easy to start with different types of deployments. So, hey, are you deploying to Azure? Are you deploying to Python? Are you deploying to Kubernetes? And you can go through, and we have a lot of starter templates. We actually have a marketplace of hundreds of different templates and tasks that people have provided in. One of the other things that you can go do, let's exit out of this, is have preconditions and postconditions. So a lot of the times in a deployment, you may want to say, hey, I want this specific person has to sign off before it goes to the next stage. So to get to production, maybe one of your release managers or someone has to go sign off on that build. So what we have is a way to kind of specify when those triggers, what they are. You can set up scheduled builds. Again, you can have approvals. So I can go through here. I could enable approvals. I can go ahead and add anyone that I want that has to approve of this. I can give a certain timeout, determine if it's going to go or not based off that timeout's met. One of the other really interesting aspects of this is actually gates as well. So one of the things that I can do is set up a set of gates. So in this case, I've set up ServiceNow. I also have a query that's running to make sure there are no bugs assigned to this release. And those run on certain intervals. And when they're all passed in green, I can say, OK, when everything's green with this gate, and this is an extensible thing that anybody can add to, then we move forward to that next stage. So it, again, allows you to have that control between the different stages of your pipeline. I can go over here, and you can see we have a number of different built-in gates that are right there. And then also, sometimes you want to have pre-deployment conditions. In other cases, you would want to have post-deployment conditions. So you can go up and set up a similar set of gates. It's the same types of gates that you'd maybe want to run after a deployment. Maybe you're fine with everybody going to your test environment. It doesn't matter. You don't want to block that up front. You just want it to go in, and then you want to run a set of approvals on that afterward. So you can go ahead and specify that and kind of go into all the details on exactly what you want for that experience. One of the other interesting aspects is the marketplace that we've kind of built around this. So you'll notice here, we have a visual editor as well. You can use YAML. But in this case, all the artifacts that I'm grabbing from this were, yes, they were produced with Jenkins, but we're grabbing them from Artifactory. In this case, I was doing an Ansible deployment. But one of the things we have is a marketplace of lots of different tasks to help you get started. So you can click on this plus, and you can see the hundreds of different tasks we have. Whether or not I'm doing ants, I can build mobile apps through here, whether it be Android, iOS, Artifactory tasks, mini tasks for AWS if you want to do deployments to AWS. Go through, obviously, deployments to Azure, as you would expect. You can go through here. We have deployments for Kubernetes, Conda, almost anything that you can think of. We have a built-in set of deployments. And then we have a rich marketplace as well. And this is kind of pulling in these marketplace tasks right here. And you can just click add those tasks over into your pipeline, and immediately get started using them. And whenever you add a task, you can also lock it to a specific version. One of the things we've noticed for people is, you know, a task author, you may not want to always be taking their latest. They may be breaking your environment, so you can lock it into a certain version and then kind of choose when you want to upgrade and move between those different versions of a given task. So let me jump back over here. My slides. Great. So we walked through a couple different things here. So when you think about Azure Pipelines, one of our core value props is really about being able to build any language, any platform, any cloud. And that's kind of part and parcel to being really what we want to be is the best open source CICD provider, so that any open source repo can go over, start building the product, have a simple experience with a single pipeline. You can use YAML, you can use a visual editor, you can go through and have a really powerful experience and making sure you're testing on all the core platforms. You know, I talked about Mac, Linux, and Windows. This month, we're also releasing support for ARM. This won't be in our hosted cloud, but our private agents that you can run on your own will have ARM support, and we'll also have 32-bit support. And those are actually driven from direct requests we've had from open source repos. As we've been going out and talking to different teams, especially a lot of the lower level components, they're saying, hey, this is really great, but if I want to have this vision of one pipeline to run everything, I need to be able to do more than just the classic kind of client and server operating systems. I need to be able to be on IoT. I need to be able to be on ARM devices. I need to even be able to run on 32-bit hardware, not just like build 32-bit, but actually running on real 32-bit hardware. So that's something that we're adding today for our private agents. Again, you would have to bring that hardware yourself, but over time, we want to get that into the hosted pool as well. One of the other things is really this flexible workflows and environments you sort of kind of saw us go through, the extensibility and community that we've built there. And then the third point on there is really around containers and Kubernetes. So one of the things that we want to make sure is like there's an obvious trend, especially if you're using web services. Maybe not if you're doing packages. Some people are building those in containers. Some people aren't. A lot of times you want to make sure those run on different clients. But we have native kind of built-in support through tasks for Kubernetes so that you can go through all the gates that I showed before. Those will work for a Kubernetes cluster. You can set up a certain set of gates there. And then you can have a set of containers that kind of get orchestrated through your entire pipeline. So again, you can run your code inside one container for the entire job. And then very soon, we're going to be introducing container steps. So actually, the individual steps can actually be separate micro containers that you can run on that same VM image. So if you want to get kind of more performance and break up your build even smaller inside that one container job, you can run individual container steps directly inside there. So that's everything. I'll be up here for a few questions if anybody has anything, and thank you so much. If you go up to the second floor upstairs, we have a great getting started experience. Sorry, I hit that odd demo bug here. But one of the things you can go up and we can go ahead and get you started. We have plenty of people up on the booth. I'll be up there. I'll be happy to answer questions here or also afterward upstairs. And we can show you how to get started. It's just a couple clicks, go to the Marketplace app, install it. We set everything up for you, and then we take you through the flow there. So thank you.